Stephen Fleming has been my banner carrier for many years regarding commercial space, of course, because he is an initial investor and a director of Export. And he is so well connected that even when nobody else would talk to me regarding anything in commercial space, he could find out the information and he would talk about them. So I'm always happy to have him here. And he is going to talk this year about why, along the top, it may not be a wise idea to go to Mars yet.
All right.
Questions at the end, or?
Probably questions at the end, and if we could hit number 4 on the slides, on the lights there. Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank y'all for being here. I didn't expect this much of a crowd on a Sunday, so thank you for waking up and rolling out of bed and coming to your first track of the day. As I said when I did a different presentation last year I think it was 116 slides. This time I have 93 in 60 minutes. I will go really fast through the slides. Don't obsess over them. They're all online, and the address is on the last page. You can download them. So we talked to Rain about Mars Day, and I actually had the title of Why We Can't Go to Mars. And she insisted I add the word yet. I will tell you, and by an hour from now, you may agree with me that the actual answer may be ever. And nobody here, including me, wants to hear that. And you're going, well, why the heck not? Because we're sending Matt Damon. In fact, we're leaving him there. And as we've discussed in some of the other sessions, the book, how many people have read The Martian? Okay, everyone whose hand is down, when you leave here, log on to the Kindle store and buy the book and read it. It's fabulous. Movie comes out October 2nd. And it is actually, to within novelistic, actually even within novelistic standards, it is actually really good science in this book. And so there's a lot of stuff on there about how we're going to go to Mars. So why the heck can't we go to Mars? And there's people out there like Mars One who's heard of Mars One. This is the one-way mission. 6 people will go and die on Mars, hopefully not at the point of impact. And so they say they're going to Mars, and you're saying, well they're actually lying, because everything they're saying is not actually true. Why the heck could we not go to Mars tomorrow? And there's a lot of reasons, and I'm going to rattle through these. I don't have words on most of my slides. This one does have some words. Those in the back, I hope you can read the screen there. But we're going to talk about some of the risks, the financial risk. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. That's a different talk. Mostly about the physiological risks and then some of the engineering risks that we're just not ready for yet. So first, we're going to talk about the Martian Defense Grid. So we have had, I can't read my own slides, 19 successful missions to Mars, and a lot of those are the U.S., and actually most of those are the recent ones. But the earliest one was the flyby back in 1964. And Sarah and Kim actually went through some of this in their talk a little earlier. And you'd say, well, that's pretty good. But then you look at the number of failures we've had 28. It's hard to get to Mars. And yes, a lot of those were Soviet missions, and a lot of those were a long time ago. But the truth of the matter is only 40% of the Mars missions we've ever launched have actually gotten there. And if you're putting people on it, if you're getting on an airplane at Hartsfield with a 40% chance of getting off at the other end, you might not buy that ticket. So that's a problem just at the mission level, that it's really hard. How much would it cost? That's a different talk. I'm not going to obsess about that here. But NASA has become a master of pork barrel engineering, of maximizing the cost and minimizing the flight hardware. And if you talk to some of the folks at NASA, there is a meme running around that it would cost $1 trillion for a Mars mission the NASA way. That actually is not true. That was misreported and exaggerated, but the $1 trillion was just too wonderful a number to throw around. And so you'll hear that kicked around in the Mars community a lot, that a manned mission is going to cost $1 trillion. It probably wouldn't. Doing it the NASA way would probably cost $100 billion. So one tenth of an Iraq war. But nevertheless, that is a great deal of money. That actually is something that, given NASA's current budget, that's comparable to building ISS over the last 25-ish years, and that would require an increase. That, I'm sorry, folks. We tell you to mail your congressman, mail your senator, mail the president, all that. Yay, do all that anyhow. But the truth of the matter is that's probably not a realistic number right now. There are other people that are trying to do it different ways. Elon Musk is the obvious one, but doing it through NASA, unfortunately, has to go through our National Rocket Design Bureau, which are these folks that you elect. And they've decided they know how to design rockets better than the rocket engineers at NASA know how to do, and so they mandate certain things. And so they've mandated the Senate Launch System, which is supposed to be called the Space Launch System. That's not original. I can't take credit for that joke. Where we're going to build these ginormous things. And so by comparison, that's a Saturn V. These are way bigger. They're incredibly expensive. There's really not any missions funded to use them. But by God, they've got strap-on boosters made in the state of Utah, because it is actually federal law that NASA is not allowed to build rockets without strap-on boosters in the state of Utah. That actually is a federal law.
They have to be from Utah.
Pardon?
They have to be from
That's the law. They have to be from Utah, yes.
What defense contractor got that one?
Thiokol, which is now, what, Orbital THK, is that there? Yeah, or Orbital THK. That's the way this stuff works, guys. That's the way it works. So they do lots of pretty pictures. It'll be a beautiful flight when it happens, but it is so incredibly expensive it'll probably only fly once a year, and a Mars mission would take 2. They're also going to cost probably $4 to $5 billion per flight, and you start adding those up, and you can see how you get to that $100 billion number pretty quickly. Not gonna focus on cost here, but doing it the NASA way, through NASA contracting, through the current NASA budget process, through the current Congress that we've elected, is a non-starter. So I'm sorry, that's just true. Okay, let's wave magic wands and we get a different Congress, because we can do that every 2 years if you all vote right. And we get a different Congress, and we get a different NASA administration, and we get the money. Let's talk about engineering and science now for the rest of the talk. Mars is far. Mars is a long way. Mars is 500 times as far away as the moon. And it's probably at least 500 times as hard to get there as the moon. There are different sorts of missions that we can look at. This is called a conjunction class mission, where if I can get my pointer to work. Is there a better pointer that I could steal? Rain,
Yes, I do.
I need a pointer that I can rely on. So when the Earth is about here and the Mars is about there, you leave from Earth, and let's see if this one works better. The little red thing. It's dark and I can't see.
Oh, here, then I got another one.
There, it works.
You got it?
Can you all see the red dot? When Earth is here, Mars is here, you leave Earth, and you spend, a good chunk of a year in a nice transfer orbit to Mars. So you're in your spacecraft for, about 6 months-ish. And then this is minimizing minimizing the propellant you need to get there and back. And then you stay on Mars for most of a Martian year, which is about a year and a half here on Earth. So you're on the surface for a long time, with all the necessities of life support and everything that you need. And then at this point you leave Mars, and you do a nice little transfer orbit back to where Earth is going to be when you get there. And this is the overall thing. Total trip time is about 942 days, which does fit within one presidential administration, yay. So the same person who wished you goodbye can welcome you back for the ticker tape parade. But that's a long time to be away from Earth. That's a long time to be dependent on artificial life support. The transit time in each of these yellow legs going out and going back, and again, it depends on when you leave. There's different times when it works better, works. Sometimes you can cut a little time off of that. Sometimes you can make it take even longer than this. But hand-waving number, you're going to spend at least 6 months transit time each way. So you're going to spend 6 months in a spacecraft very far away from Earth, way further away than we've ever been before. And so this is a pretty picture. This is CGI, obviously, of one of the NASA concepts of what that could look like. And you can tell that it's a NASA design because it still uses things that are the size of shuttle main tanks, which means they're built in Michoud, Mississippi, because they have a congressman there who likes building stuff there. If you get a little more ambitious, this is better CGI because it's from the movie The Martian. So this is Hermes. This is the ship in the movie, and you can see the rotating section here, which we'll talk about a little later. Being out that far for 6 months is hard. A little rock can ruin your whole day. If you can't see that that's a ruler. That was off one of the shuttle missions. That was probably something bigger than a fleck of paint, but smaller than a BB. And it went right through the aluminum panels and made that great big hole. You're going to be a long ways from home, and one of those can ruin your whole day. More importantly, so how many people, it's a mix of ages in the audience, how many people grew up reading Robert Heinlein? Yay, Heinlein. Heinlein was wrong on something. I know, it's hard for me to say that sentence, but he was wrong. And he publicized to my generation, and those of you who raised your hands, that, zero gravity was good for you. And you'd float around, and you'd actually, live to be 200 years because you'd take all the weight off your joints and everything. And that just turns out not to be true. Zero gravity, microgravity, free fall, whatever you want to call it, is actually really bad for us. It's really bad for us. So the reality is not that we're floating around, collecting flat cats or tribbles. Is that you are. This is, believe it or not, it is the Colbert treadmill, and there's a long acronym that I cannot remember. Yes, they named the treadmill after Stephen Colbert. I love it. And this is the treadmill on station, and she's actually bungee corded. That's a bungee cord to a harness that goes over her shoulders, and so she's running against tension to try to put some virtual weight onto the long muscles of her legs and her hip structure. And they do that 2 hours a day. How many people here run on a treadmill 2 hours every day, not with no failures? Yeah, I didn't think so. They do. And even when they do that with dedicated aerobic exercise 2 hours a day, when they land off of Soyuz, this is how they come out. And they're carried off in basically a stretcher because once you've been on station for 6 months, you can't walk. Who's going to carry them off the Mars lander?
I will carry them.
You will carry them. Thank you. Yes. We'll talk a little more about the gravity issues in a bit. The muscular atrophy for the mission itself, in other words, the 6-month transit time, is a real problem. Bone loss is very consistent among anybody that spends any time on station. There's very noticeable bone loss. Some of that looks like it's irreversible. Some of that they can build back up with heavy exercise back once they're on Earth. And then this one is actually a scary one, is vision changes. She's looking into a vision tester. Multiple serious problems with your vision in zero gravity, starting with something as comparatively simple as glaucoma, which I have, all the way to swellings of optic nerves and loss of visual acuity to the point where they've actually been astronauts that after 6 months on station can no longer read their own checklists, and they've actually been shipping up different prescription lenses saying A or B, A or B. That's a problem. That's actually a real problem. It may actually be irreversible. The ones that have come back don't seem to regain their visual acuity once they're back in a 1G field. And when you've got somebody whose title is Chief Science of Human Research Program at NASA saying this may be a showstopper, they don't use words like that lightly. It turns out that our eyeballs do not like being in zero gravity, and we use our eyeballs a lot. And one of the things that Hawk mentioned in his talk 2 sessions ago was visual degradation from radiation. There's also visual degradation from zero gravity during the mission. So if you get to Mars and you can't see the checklist and you can't climb out of the lander when you land, that's not a good start of a mission. That's a problem. Low blood pressure, that's been pretty consistent among the astronauts on station. They're beginning to notice T-cell deficiencies from their immune systems. And at some point, somebody's going to break a leg, or somebody's going to do something else that requires surgery, and that's obviously actually an Alka-Seltzer dissolved in water, which is kind of a cool demo. Surgery in a zero gravity field is going to be kind of interesting. How many people know who G. Harry Stein was? Anybody ever build an Estes rocket? Yeah, that was him. He under a pseudonym of Lee Corey, he wrote a set of books, and one of them was called Space Doctrine. He was the first one to really actually seriously look at how would you do surgery without gravity, because the blood goes everywhere. We don't know how to do that yet, because luckily nobody on station has had a situation that actually requires surgery, and if something God forbid did happen to somebody, they're 24 hours away, or less than that. When you're on Mars, you don't have that option, so we're going to have to figure that out. And then Hawk mentioned this in his session, but apparently a lot of you weren't functioning yet. Is that space is radioactive? How many people really internalize that? You got lots of pretty pictures And the photographs are great, but if you're out where those photographs are being taken, you're probably rapidly dying. Space is death. Space is radioactive, and deep space is terribly, terribly radioactive. We're lucky. We live in here, where we have the Van Allen belts, which are not nearly that colorful in real life, which are a side effect of the magnetosphere, or the magnetic field surrounding the Earth, and that protects Earth from most of the horrible radiation out there. And as a side benefit, it protects what's in low Earth orbit. So station is about right there, or shuttle is about right there. So we've only been outside of this 7 times during the 7 Apollo missions, 6 of which landed, 1 of which came back without landing. And we were only gone for a couple of days. So we have very little experience with trying to sustain human life outside the Van Allen radiation belts. But, you know, Hawk went through some of the numbers this morning, and it's kind of scary. Because, as he said, the 2 things that you really want to protect you against radiation is a planetary magnetosphere and 10 miles of thick atmosphere, neither one of which Mars has. So there's problems there. But actually, at the moment, I'm still talking about transit, getting there on the trip. So you're going to be in a relatively small spacecraft with some of your closest friends for a long time. How many people have seen this O. Henry quote? If you can't read it, if you want to instigate the art of manslaughter, just shut 2 men up in an 18 by 20 foot cabin for a month. Human nature won't stand it. How many people have done a road trip with children? Imagine being in something slightly bigger than a minivan with 5 of your closest friends for 6 months, and you can't open the windows, and you can't get outside. I hope everybody lives to get to Mars. And that's somewhat joking and somewhat not. The psychological issues are quite scary, is that people aren't evolved to live in such constrained environments where, you know, opening the door means everybody dies. That's scary. Obviously, you know, no chance of resupply. This is station. You keep hearing about the station resupply missions, which are now commercial. Yay, commercial space. So NASA's not being a trucking company to station anymore. And so every so often they get this nice capsule full of goodies. If you're going to Mars, those capsules don't follow. So you have to take all the goodies you're going to have for 952 days, or however long it is. You have to take them with you. You almost certainly grow potatoes. You cannot take enough water, so you have to recycle what the used water is. And we've made progress. I mean, that is on station right now. They're drinking recycled water. So we're learning how to do that. We don't know how to do it well enough yet, but we're learning. You probably can't take enough food, and growing potatoes aside, there is going to have to be a lot of work on growing food from other resources, because you can't take enough with you. So we need to get really good at recycling. And right now, that basically just vents over the side like an old cruise ship in the 1920s. So, you know, you can't do that. You're going to have to save everything and learn what to do with it. But that being said, you know, congratulations, yay, you made it. You've arrived at Mars. Mars is kind of interesting. It has just enough of an atmosphere to be troublesome, but not enough to really help. So, you know, you've got to figure out a way to stop, because you're going about twice Earth orbital velocity. So you're going, you know, multiple miles per second, and then at touchdown you need to be traveling 0 miles per second. And so somehow you have to get from one to the other. And how many people watched the Curiosity landing 3 years ago? Yeah, so 7 minutes of terror, right? So we just do that again, right? No. That was fabulous. It's great. They're going to use it again for Mars 2020. But basically, the size limit on both Curiosity and the Mars 2020 rover is that's about as big a vehicle as can be done this way with the sky crane. And anything bigger than that, you need to do something else. Which probably is a pure rocket-powered descent, which means great big fuel tanks and, you know, lots of engines, lots of fuel, because there's just not you can't make parachutes big enough to slow down anything much bigger than that in the Martian atmosphere. So you probably have to do what's called a propulsive descent, which is rocket engines. And so how many people have seen the picture of the Red Dragon from SpaceX? Yay, Elon Musk. We love Elon. Yeah, cool, except he doesn't tell you that looks like the Dragon capsule, which is going to take 7 people to orbit here soon, but actually that one has a payload of about 1 ton. 1 ton is not that much, especially if you're talking, human missions. I mean, for supply missions or, rovers or stuff like that, a ton is pretty cool. But by comparison, that vehicle is 7.5 tons. That vehicle is 18 tons. Okay? And they were only there for a couple days. Right, who this is? Seriously, I recognize the photograph? Who said John Young? John Young, yes. John Young. Go Jackets. Georgia Tech graduate. Yeah, so, that's going to be a challenge. And if you start doing the math about, how big does the vehicle need to be, it gets big. You need a couple of 50-tonners just to carry enough fuel to get you down safely and then take off again. You're talking, not of flying something the size of a minivan down to the surface. You're talking of flying something the size of a 3-story house. We're learning a lot about those sort of landings. We don't know how to do that yet. We just don't know how. We can learn. So, all of that was meant to be scary. Not meant to be depressing. It means that there are challenges. Yeah, good job, yeah. Meant that there are challenges, okay? There's just a lot of uncertainties out there before we actually do a Mars mission. And so what does that mean? That means we should learn. We should reduce those uncertainties. And the key message of this presentation, which I'll come back to at the end, is that we just don't know enough yet. We haven't learned a lot of this stuff yet. We've begun doing some learning on ISS now that we finally got the bloody thing built. But there's a lot of knowledge we don't have. Doesn't mean we can't go get it. Doesn't mean they're showstoppers, in the words of the guy from Johnson Space Center. But it means there's a lot of learning that we have to get done. And I tried to put together a list for Rain of what that would look like. Lots of words. You're going to see this slide again. But there's what we can do at the station, what we can do on the moon, what we can do elsewhere, other technology to look at, and maybe talking about Phobos, which is one of the 2 small moons of Mars. So we're going to step through these in the second half of the presentation. And believe it or not, I'm actually on slide 51 and 93, so I'm actually on schedule. So I told you I was going to go through slides fast. We have a $100 billion asset on orbit, which it would be really nice if we decided to not splash it into the Pacific Ocean. And it looks like we are going to keep it till about at least year 2024 and perhaps longer if we can keep refurbishing it. I argue that, if we're serious about Mars, then that should be repurposed as a facility for learning the stuff we don't need to know about a Mars mission, because right now that's not what it's doing. One can have different opinions about what ISS is doing, but it certainly isn't doing that. One thing we've learned a lot of from ISS, we actually have gotten, we in the United States and our partners to some extent, we've gotten pretty good at on-orbit assembly because we had to bolt that sucker together. So we've learned a lot about that, and that's going to be useful in a Mars mission, so let's keep doing that. Let's not lose that knowledge as astronauts retire and as ground crew retire. Let's make sure that the next generation is there to pick up that, the implied knowledge, not necessarily just stuff that's written down in 3-ring binders. ECLSS, Environmental Control Life Support System, did I get that right? Closed loop life support is a huge issue. That is obviously on the ground, probably in, where is that, Huntsville, I guess, maybe Johnson. And that's the system that was used to make the recycled water you saw in the previous photograph, and that's 93% efficient. Yay! No. If you multiply 93% by the number of times you would pee in a 900-day mission, it's like, no, you don't get any water at the end of that. So we have to be 99.99-ish% efficient, and we don't know how to do that yet. It's not impossible, doesn't violate the laws of physics. It's a lot of engineering work, got to work on it. We need to do that work. We just literally a month ago grew the first leaves of lettuce on station, and so people had a salad of locally grown lettuce on station, although I think they just ate the leaves. And so, yay, that's a great start. We need to do a lot more than that. We need to grow a lot more different sorts of vegetables, including potatoes. But we need to learn a lot more about how to grow that sort of stuff hydroponically. Again, doesn't violate any laws of physics. It looks like it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and it makes great science fiction stories. But if somebody, said, I'm going to write a check tomorrow to go do that, it's like, don't know how. because there's a lot of incredibly detailed engineering work to be done between, yes, we're going to grow, edible plants in Martian soil, versus, yep, here's the mix of nutrients you need, here's the things you need to carry along with you, here's the cycle of light dark that you need, here's when you can harvest, and here's how much you could expect. That's just good, solid engineering work. Hadn't been done yet. Doesn't mean we can't do it, means we haven't done it yet. The psychological issues, these brave, crazy people just bolted themselves into a hab in Hawaii a couple of weeks ago, I think. And if I'm going to spend a year in Hawaii, I don't want to spend it sealed in a dome, but, they're going to spend a year inside this thing, and they can only leave in a suit. So it's a simulation of a Martian spacesuit. Honestly, the point of it is not to simulate the Martian, sample collecting and so forth. The point of it is to see if all 6 of them can live inside that dome and not kill each other, which is unproven at this point. We're optimistic. They're nice people. They all like each other. Let's see if they still like each other a year from now. There's been a couple of discussions here about, and the shorthand is the lunatics versus the Martians. I'm a lunatic. Folks, we've had folks as respectable as our president and as Buzz Aldrin both saying that, why should we go back to the moon? We've been there. Oh gosh. First, we've had 6 pinpricks on something the size of a continent. So first, we haven't really been to the moon very much. But secondly, we really do have to go back to the moon. And this is, Les was in here earlier. He's on another panel right now. Les Johnson is an author, a frequent space track contributor. His day job is he really is a rocket scientist at Marshall Space Flight Center. But he also writes science fiction. So those of you who don't have this book, go buy it. Back to the Moon. So it is both a good story, but it also gives a good engineering overview of, if we were going to go back to the moon tomorrow, what do we actually have, in inventory that we could repurpose and go back to the moon. So it's a fun book. But the moon makes a really good test bed for figuring out how to live on Mars. We actually, I think it was Kim just now, talking about lunar dust is a lot more vicious than Martian dust, because lunar dust has all these little sharp edges that are razor sharp and they'll slice things open because they've never been eroded. So, if we can make equipment work on the moon, we can make that same equipment work on Mars as a walk in the park. So the advantage of doing it on the moon is, first, just the cost of getting there is way lower. Secondly, it's 3 days away, so if something goes wrong, you can be home in 3 days rather than 900 days. And third, you can do a lot of stuff robotically from the moon through teleoperation, because it's 3/4 of a light second away, whereas we heard previously Mars is 4 to 20 light minutes away. So you basically, in Mars, to do a rover, you have to upload all the commands the night before, let it go off, do its thing, and then the next day you find out, did you do what I told you to, and how did it work out? And I'm going to give you another set of directions. From the moon, you could actually drive it with a joystick, from here. You'd have a little bit of delay, and people have simulated that. It's kind of, you have to kind of get used to it so you don't overdrive your controls. But you could actually experiment with a lot of this stuff here locally from the moon.
Big Bang is not real.
No, the Big Bang where Wolowitz drives the Martian rover in real time and crashes it. No, there's a speed of light link in there that you're not going to make any shorter. But the moon is close. So what we can do is learn a lot about this Latin phrase, in situ resource utilization. That means on site. In other words, using what's already there to build stuff. And you can be building structures, you can be extracting rocket fuel, you can be extracting atmosphere, you can be doing whatever you need to do to build your colony using stuff that's already there rather than stuff we have to lift out of Earth's gravity, because that's really expensive. So ISRU is one of the great uses of the moon. And the other, if you saw Hawk's presentation and didn't run away screaming, is learning how to do radiation shielding, because dirt is good.
Bunny ears.
They do look like bunny ears, yeah. So learning how to build radiation shelters. That again, the moon is outside the Van Allen belts. So learning how to live, through a solar flare. What would have happened if a solar flare had gone off while the Apollo astronauts were on the moon?
They would have probably died.
No, not probably. They would have died. There was absolutely no doubt whatsoever about it. Anybody ever read Michener's book Space?
I was just going to ask you that.
Yeah, anybody ever read it? I guess it's getting old now. You can probably find it in a used bookstore for 50 cents. It basically was of course, being James Michener, it started with the Earth cooled, and then it goes forward. But mostly it was a slightly variant universe where there were 3 more Apollo missions,
What was
and
that name again?
it's just called Space, by James Michener, Michener. Great book, obviously a historical artifact at this point, because we didn't do those 3 extra missions. We did have the 3 Saturn V's necessary for 3 additional Apollo missions at a cost of multiple $billion each. They are now lawn ornaments because we decided to not go, so we chopped them up and stuck them in lawns, one at Huntsville, one at Houston, and one at Cape Canaveral, because basically we're idiots. We're not going to go to that problem. But anyhow, the moon is close enough we can learn a whole bunch of stuff about radiation shielding in a hostile environment. But if you do it wrong and you get radiation sickness and you're going to die, we can get you to a hospital on Earth in 3 days and we can save your life. And if you do it wrong on Mars and you're going to die, you're going to die. So this would be a really great place to learn some of that stuff. We also have what's called the Lagrange points. People have heard of these, I assume. At one point we thought we were all going to be living at L4 and L5. It didn't quite happen that way. But there is a place called L1, which is the point where the gravitational fields of the Earth and the Moon balance out. So you can actually you can actually keep a spacecraft there for a very minimal expenditure of propellant. And as the Moon goes around the Earth, this spot goes around the Earth at that radius. And that's a really nifty place to go. One, because it's gravitationally stable. It is way outside the Van Allen radiation belt, so it's interplanetary space, even though it's really close. And you can do a whole lot of experimentation there, which again is 3 days away, but you're not having to climb out of the lunar gravitational field. You basically just drop a rock and it eventually hits the Earth. A little harder than that, but not a whole lot. So this would be a great place to experiment with planetary and deep space technologies while you're still close enough to home to teleoperate, to send, whoops, we forgot the left-handed version of that widget. We need to send one of those up, or to send people back if you get sick. So I personally believe an L1 station is going to be, a great next destination for humans. You could run your lunar missions from there with no speed of light lag. You can launch other missions to other places from there. I think L1 stations would be a cool destination. I'm going to spend a lot of time on the next bit, using ISS for gravity and physiology testing. This is something that we should have been doing for the last 20 years, and we haven't been. This is actually a friend of ours that is building these little teleoperated robot arms for surgery. There's another version of this picture with an actual mouse there cut open, which is really kind of repulsive. So I made him use the chalk outline of the mouse. But we're going to have to learn how to do a whole lot of surgery on station, and probably the way to do that is surgeons on Earth are going to do it. And why are we going to be killing lots of mice on station? Because we need to figure out about gravity. So here's the deal. If you plot gravity along a line from here, where's my red pointer that actually works? From zero gravity to something bigger than Earth, ranging from mobility challenge to the Vitruvian Man doing jumping jacks. What do we know? We know that if you're on Earth and if you're healthy, then you can be the Vitruvian Man all day long because we've evolved in a one gravitational field, so we know how to do that. We also know that in free fall or zero gravity or technically microgravity or whatever you want to call it, but in orbit, that if you're on station, in essentially zero for any length of time, you come out in a wheelchair. That is unhealthy. It is not good for humans and other living things. I wish that weren't true. Robert Heinlein told me it wasn't true, and Robert was wrong. So that's a problem. What about other gravitational fields? Well, we've been in 1/6 gravity on the moon, so that's about 1/6 right there, and we have absolutely no knowledge of what that means to human physiology, with the one exception that it is not instantly fatal, because we did bring back 6 Apollo crews. We don't know what happened to their physiology there because we simply weren't there long enough. We don't have any data on that. What about Mars? 38% gravity. No data whatsoever. We have no idea. We have a lot of guesses. And a lot of people have made a lot of guesses. And a lot of people are planning missions based on guesses. And if I'm going to admit I'm not going to spend $100 billion, but it's probably tens of billions of dollars on a Mars mission, I would like to know that people could live on the other end. It would be nice to have that data. But here's the problem. Currently, we have 2 data points. At 0 gravity, it is unhealthy. At 1 gravity, it is healthy. How are those 2 points connected? Different scenarios. Here's a scenario. It's just a straight line. And so, at 40% gravity, or 30%, you're 40% healthy. And that's not great. You could do it. You could probably manage that for some length of time, and you'd be running on bungee cords and doing all that sort of stuff like they do on station. But basically, you don't get to go colonize that. That becomes an outpost. That's a place where you go, you do a mission, you come back, and you recuperate. And probably in a hospital bed for some period of time. That's possible. That scenario may be true. We don't know. I will say nature usually doesn't like straight lines. So if you've got 2 points, nature usually does not connect them with a straight line. Well, here's a curve. Here's scenario 2. That we really need gravity. And that you don't get healthy until you're pretty much to Earth gravity, because that's the gravitational field that we've evolved in for the last glumpsy millions of years. And it's significantly less than that. We're still not healthy. Well, that would suck. Because that means either we've got to live in habitats that are spinning, at 1 gravity, or we go to Venus, I'll talk about in one slide. But at that point, Mars is horribly unhealthy. It's as unhealthy as station, and we can go there and do flags and footprints, and then we have to come right home. And all our spaceships will eventually have to look like this, which works in free fall. So you just spin it. It's expensive, but you can do that. And at that point, the most interesting place in the solar system for humans to go live is cloud cities on Venus. Because at that point, you've got essentially 1 gravity. It's about 90% gravity. You've got 1 atmospheric pressure. You've got relatively healthy temperatures. You could build anything from blimps to large floating cities. The only problem is the atmosphere outside is full of sulfuric acid, so that's a problem. But it's really great because you can stick your Thanksgiving turkey out the airlock and it's cooked. So ding, a little butterball pops open. That probably gets to be the only other place that we live other than Earth. And as a human backup system in case the big rock comes and does a dinosaur killer on humanity, that's a pretty flimsy read. And that doesn't make me happy. But anybody who claims that this is wrong right now is guessing at best and lying at worst. We just don't know. We just don't have the data. Let's draw the curve the other way. I like this curve better. Is this one is a little gravity goes a long way, and that 1/3 gravity is actually perfectly fine. So maybe you're 80% effective, and you have to do a little extra aerobics, but we all ought to do that anyhow. And this means that Mars is the next human world. Fire up the Mars Colonial Transporter. That's great. And this is the scenario which I think most people are working under, is that 1/3 of a gravity is enough to keep our bones happy and our joints happy and our hearts pumping successfully and our eyes from popping open, and that's going to be perfectly healthy. I really hope this is true. Hope is not a strategy. Hope is hope. Data is data. They're not the same thing. We don't have the data. Interestingly enough, if this is true, Mars becomes the next human world. The moon is probably still not terribly a healthy place to be. So you probably would have hardship posts on the moon for both commercial and for military reasons. But every place else, Jovian moons, Titan, all that sort of stuff, bye-bye. We're not going to go live there. That's not going to happen because there's not enough gravity there to make it healthy. So that's scenario 3. There is a scenario 4. Superman. What if, lower but not 0 gravity is good for us? So this is kind of the old Heinlein scenario, except it's not zero gravity, it's lesser gravity. Means your joints are supporting less load, your heart's pumping less fluid. You know, in general, this is a good thing for you, and Mars is the kind of place to raise your kid. Or to retire. So, you know, it's the space of Winnebagos. It's where we all go when we retire to. You know, that actually is a pretty interesting scenario, which I would love for that to be true. Not only because does that mean that we do get 1 million people living on Mars and being a backup system for the human race, which is what Elon's trying to do, but also every place else starts looking healthy. That means that the moon and any place else with a sixth of gravity is probably good enough to keep us in good shape. The moon becomes the most expensive property in the solar system, and you start looking at where we can go live. And so we live here. You know, we could live in the clouds here. You could live in the clouds of Saturn. It happens to be exactly 1 gravity. It's really cold. You got to figure out how to keep it warm. But then we can live on the moon. We can live on Mars. We can live on Titan. We can live on as many of the Jovian moons as don't kill us with the radiation. We could burrow into Mercury. Ceres still has, you know, way too little gravity to be interesting. But, you know, we get 6 places where humanity can go live, you know, with some hand-waving level of engineering plausibility. And so that would be really cool. So, which of those is real? We don't have any idea. We don't, and you can draw more. You can do sinusoids in there if you want to, right? I mean, who knows? We don't have the data. We know that point, and we know that point, and we got no freaking clue about what's in between. But why don't we know that? Well, you can't simulate that on Earth. There's no way on Earth to get 1/3 of a gravity or to get 1/6 of gravity, except for the Vomit Comet, which I got to fly a few years ago, and it's a lot of fun, but you're doing it for, 25 seconds. You know, you can't really tell, how does that affect your physiology for 25 seconds other than, whee! Now we're done. So we need some centrifuges. There have been plans to do, remember centrifuges, put a slingshot on the end of on a string, spin it around, it gets heavier. There have been various proposals for putting centrifuges on ISS. We've never done one. Mostly because as the people that manage ISS look at them, they go, no, you're putting large, heavy, rotating objects that vibrate a lot inside my biosystem. No, don't do that. So we really can't put them inside of ISS. We could put one next door. And this is probably a really good thing that NASA ought to be doing if NASA was actually serious about space exploration, is to do a free flyer. So this is not connected to ISS. You would have to somehow get back and forth, either in a spacesuit or maybe a little capsule of some sort. Go back and forth. There's been various proposals put together. This is about $100 million tube, which would have the whole thing is not tumbling as a centrifuge. No, it has centrifuges inside of it, and they have to come in pairs because they have to go in opposite directions. Otherwise, you're steering.
Something that Bigelow could do?
Bigelow could do this, yes. Bigelow should do this. So these are the sorts of things that as we get the cost of space access down, which is a different talk here at DragonCon, we can start doing things like this. And honestly, with nation-state budgets, we should have been doing this 20 years ago, and we didn't. So now it'll be at the point where Bigelow or Elon or others, Jeff Bezos, what have you, can do it, and I think that's how we'll see it happen. But what you'll get then is you'll actually get real data on, which of those curves is true, and, what do we need to be healthy as human beings, because right now we just don't know. We're pretty sure that zero is a bad idea, so we need to start doing more experimentation with centrifugal tethers. When is the first mission that was flown with a centrifugal tether with a man in it, or people in it? Gemini Agena, 1965.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, we did this! Then we forgot. Let's do this again. Because if we're going to Mars, if you're not going to build the big wheel like the Hermes in the movie, just taking 2 capsules, one with people, one with stuff, putting them on a string, spinning them end over end, that would probably be a much healthier way of getting there than just staying in zero gravity for 6 months, which is the current plan. We need to learn how to do propellant depots because the plans currently are obviously, if you need bigger missions, you make bigger rockets because then you spend more money in Utah and Mississippi and Alabama and a handful of other states and Louisiana and other places. You can only make them so big. We're going to have to learn how to gas things up in orbit, okay? We're just going to have to. And there's just stuff we got to go learn. I mean, how do the valves work? How does the pressure work? How does the plumbing work? If you get a static discharge, does everything blow up? That would be bad. We just got to get experience with this. It again doesn't violate the laws of physics. It has been a policy decision to not do on-orbit refueling. That's a bad decision. We need to revisit that. We need to learn how to do that. That would be for the sorts of propellants we have now. You can get to Mars with chemical rockets. You absolutely can. You can use existing chemical rockets. Well, we've done it with unmanned missions, with the rovers and the landers. You can get to Mars with chemical rockets. You probably shouldn't. You probably should go with something a little more advanced. And so this is a diagram from 1963 when we thought we were going to build nuclear engines. And we stopped. Okay, why are we laughing? Okay, I don't want a nuclear engine taking off from Cape Canaveral because people live there. And they'd like to continue living. But once you're in orbit, remember, space is radioactive. Adding a little more radioactivity to space doesn't matter. So we should have lots of experience by now. We should have 40 years of experience with nuclear engines. We don't. Let's start, because we need to learn a lot about strength of materials, embrittlement, other things that we need to get better at. Because that would be a much specific impulse is a measure of the efficiency of a rocket engine. These are way more efficient than any chemical engine can possibly be under the laws of physics. So we should be building those. We should be building even more exotic things like nuclear electric propulsion with Vasimir, which in theory could get us to Mars in 39 days, which cuts a lot of the health risks. Don't know if this will work yet or not. Looks promising. So Franklin Chang Diaz is doing some interesting work on this down in Costa Rica, former NASA astronaut. Yes, we should be doing lots of work on things like Vasimir. And we should even take a couple of bucks and work on stuff like this. How many people have heard of the EM drive? It's almost certainly bogus. It's almost certainly, I believe, honest experimental error on the part of the inventors. But if it's true, this is a Star Trek impulse drive, and it changes the world. Electromagnetic. I think it's a mistake. I think they will eventually find that there are subtle errors in their experimental design that are masking this amount of thrust. But throw a few $1 million at it, because if it's true, we get an impulse drive. So we should be experimenting with things like that. At the other end, for slowing down, rather than having great big heat shields and such, there's ways of doing this electromagnetically. So you basically put on a big magnetic heat shield. It's intangible. It's just a field, and you use that to slow down against the Martian atmosphere, and that's actually being tested. So that's actually in where is that? Is that right, Pat? The vacuum chamber? I don't remember.
I think so.
That's actually being tested now. So there's things like that are just good, solid engineering work that good Georgia Tech Go Jackets, good Georgia Tech engineers ought to have jobs working on this stuff, and it's either being very minimally funded or not funded at all. And the last thing is you really want to land. Michael Melling over in the corner there is fond of saying, why would I want to spend all the energy to climb out of Earth's gravity well just to fall down another one? Why don't we stay in zero gravity, obviously with mitigations through centrifuges to make us healthy. A base on Phobos would be really cool. Phobos, for one thing, looks like an abandoned starship from 1 million years ago, so I want to go find out what it's made of, because it doesn't make any sense. But also, all the stuff we talked about teleoperating rovers on Mars with 20-minute light speed of light delays. Here you can do it with sub-second speed of light delays, and you can actually get a whole lot more work done in a day. So doing a Phobos base would be a good mission. And the energy required to get to Phobos, in other words, just orbiting Mars, is about half that needed to land on Mars. So it's a whole lot, and there's an exponential in there, so it's probably a quarter as expensive to go to Mars orbit than to Mars surface. So getting close may be good enough in this particular game of horseshoes. You can read this list again. It's the same list as before. There's a lot of good, solid engineering work to be done there. And unfortunately, I think it's a couple of decades of good, solid engineering work. Once we have the funding, there's a good couple of decades of work to be done on making this stuff real. And until that work's done, the idea of a one-way mission to Mars, people denigrate it as being a suicide mission. I actually think that's not a bad idea. I think that having a one-way mission where you don't promise people how or when they're going to return, although you maintain the possibility that they could as technology and budgets get better, is perfectly legitimate. But I think that sending them on a one-way mission right now, without knowing this stuff, is basically assisted suicide. And that's probably not something that we or hopefully any other civilized country would do. Once we get green check marks on all of those things, then, Rain's word is back, why we can't go to Mars yet. So I hope it's not an ever. I hope we do get to go. I think I'm probably too old. There's some people in this audience who probably are young enough you do get to go. And I think it should be the next human world. But there's a whole bunch of stuff we don't know yet. I've left 10 minutes for questions. I've got one slide to end with at the end, but we'll do, if we can hit the lights up, we'll do Q&A until then. And use the mic for Q&A because Rain's recording. So.
Max, can you turn up the volume, please?
All right. Speak loud and I'll repeat the first one.
Batteries died.
Okay. All
Okay,
right.
I'll go ahead. First of all, thank you. This was.
I think the batteries died.
Thank you. This is everything I was hoping for. When you talk about simulating gravity.
Loud mic. There we go.
Thank you.
Okay.
When you talk about simulating gravity in space, I've read a lot about the centrifuge who you're talking about.
Yep.
The only way I've read to overcome the Coriolis effect is to make them really, really, really big.
Yep.
The one you showed was pretty small. So
The Hermes is you'd probably get dizzy and throw up a lot.
Okay.
The one in the movie, yeah, it's probably not big enough. But the what he's saying is the centrifugal force, which is slinging something around on the end of a string. If your string is too short, you have to sling it a lot faster to get a simulated 1 gravity or a third of a gravity or however much it turns out physiologically we need. And you wind up with different gravitational gradient between your head and your feet, and that makes you dizzy. The way to solve that is you make the string longer and you sling it more slowly, which if you remember the 2 spacecraft I showed there, the 2 tin cans on a string, you can make that tether as long as is reasonable.
And to make something like the movie Interstellar, but a lot bigger than that,
Yeah.
is obviously prohibitively expensive, but what are your thoughts of maybe going that way someday?
I think that, you go back, how many people saw the von Braun presentation on Friday night? Yeah. The von Braun wheel was a really good plan, and if we were spending 6% of the gross domestic product on it, we could build one of those. But centrifugal acceleration like that is for, I think, any sort of long-term habitation of space is the right answer. And you can make them, 100 meters wide and do a von Braun wheel. You can make them a kilometer wide and do an O'Neill colony. You can make them even bigger and do sillier things, but something like that is going to be necessary. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next.
Hi.
Right there. Yes.
My voice is everywhere.
Yeah. Go ahead and hit the lights. I'll do the last slide in the light. So, yeah.
So you covered a lot of the technical aspects
Mhm.
of getting there, and so it's a matter of time if we have the funding.
Right.
So what would be, as someone who has an interest in this stuff, the political aspects that you would see that we need to overcome? Because I'm sure the checklist is probably longer. And that might be a different panel.
That could be an entire talk.
It has been an entire
It might
talk,
be an entire
and it can be again. It may be a different con.
But,
There's multiple uses of the word con in that sentence as well. Let me just say that I don't believe that as a national government-funded program to send government employees to Mars, which is what we did with the moon. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were government employees at that time. I do not believe that is feasible within our lifetimes. I believe that as a public-private partnership or potentially as a purely private enterprise mission, I believe we're approaching the point where that becomes feasible. But doing it as a NASA mission with NASA employees on NASA rockets, I don't think that is possible under any conceivable set of political circumstances. That's my opinion. Other people differ. But public-private partnerships, like we're doing with commercial transport to station now, all the cargo now to stations being carried commercially. We will carry astronauts commercially as soon as the paperwork lets us. Technically, we know how to do it already. Doing it that way makes more sense. An analogy I like to use is a friend of mine at National Science Foundation who says, when they want to run an Antarctic mission, and you know, an Antarctic mission is not as tough as a Mars mission, but it's hard. I mean, Antarctica will kill you. It says, you know, they don't sit with a clean sheet of paper and begin to design a helicopter. You know, they simply, you know, rent a helicopter from somebody and fly their scientists to McMurdo Sound or wherever they're going. The vertically integrated stack of starting with everything from transport systems through life support through mission, I don't believe we can do that. I think it's going to have to be public-private, and I think some people are going to have to be able to get wealthy in the process. There's not going to be a motivation for them. So we are going to create space billionaires, and some of them will be made on trips to Mars. So, yeah, next.
You showed, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You showed a wonderful slide of the plasma dynamic decelerator.
Yes.
And it struck me that what would make a good super parachute in the Martian atmosphere would also make a heck of a good radiation shield in space, since most of the particles are charged the same magnetic field. If you flew with it, would that not deflect most of them?
There are discussions about using a strong magnetic field as a particle deflector. It would not deflect neutral particles, so micrometeoroids and neutrons will still kill you dead. It would deflect the charged particles, which are some of the worst ones. It would work. Again, that's a good, solid engineering problem for some really smart graduate students and a couple of primary investigators to go work on. I will point out it would consume enormous amounts of energy. If you have a nuclear-powered ship, you could probably afford that energy budget. If you're a solar-powered ship, ain't going to happen. Even with superconductors, you're still physically deflecting charged particles. You're changing their momentum. That takes energy. So you couldn't do it on a solar-powered mission. So, next. I don't know where the mic is. Brett?
Sorry. So, I mean, you talked about different propulsion systems.
Yep.
You know, if something came along that cut down the trip to Mars by, say, like 30 days or less, realistically, how much would that change some of the difficulties we're going to be facing? It still sounds like there's a crap ton of problems to overcome.
There's still a crap ton of problems, to use a technical term. I think that if we got it to 30 days, I think that there would suddenly be a lot more support for doing it, especially because, you know, you're getting to a point where people could say, you know, you could go and come back, you know, in a congressional term. I do think that reducing trip time is a very laudable goal for a lot of mission-related reasons. You still have all the problems as once you're on the surface, is Mars wants to kill you. And, you know, you're still going to have to, you know, dig a bunch of holes and cover it up with a lot of dirt. And, you know, as Hawk was saying, you know, believe it or not, the first two things we need to ship to Mars is, one, an electric bulldozer, and B, a nuclear power plant to run it. And until you get that, you can't live on Mars.
The other part of the question, you mentioned, you know, using centrifugal force to simulate gravity. How actually effective is that? Because, you know, you have to be at the very outer part of the rotation, very outer radius. So it leaves a lot of your ship or whatever that's not under that effect, at least to the extent of the outer part. And then if you leave that part, you're not under the influence of it. You know, so I guess how realistically, how much can we count on that helping?
Well, what you do is as you've seen in the pictures and in others, and in the 210, you put all the good stuff at the edge, and then the middle is really just cables. Or you do the Discovery, which is the 2001 vehicle, where you put, like, you know, the pod bay doors, where, you know, all of that goes in the middle part that's not rotating, which actually was part of that movie, which was completely bogus. Is the pod bays would have been in zero gravity, and Stanley Kubrick, God love him, simply could not afford to film, you know, Keir Delay and what's his name? They're both here at the con this week. Gary Lockwood could not afford to do all the pod bay scenes in zero gravity, but in that design, the only thing in gravity would have been the spinning centrifuge. So, yeah.
No, we got a question back
I'm
here.
sorry. Yeah.
So sort of follow up on the centrifuge question.
Mic closer.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sort of follow up on the centrifuge questions. Since there's such a dramatic difference in what's open to us depending on how we respond to gravity and how the curve goes, we have mice in space. The distance between their head and their feet is really tiny. Doesn't that make for a good model that we could explore varying levels of gravity simulated?
The centrifuge that I how did that screen get on screen? I wasn't ready for that slide yet. Oh well, we'll talk about that in a second. Because I was going to step back, but I'm not going to fiddle with slides. No, we do have mice on station, but they're not in a centrifuge. That free flyer that I was showing, the centrifuges in there would be for mice, maybe rabbits, but certainly not for humans. So yeah, we would still learn enough about being able to reproduce in various levels of gravity. And obviously the hope is, that a sixth or a third is enough, because then if you are doing a rotating structure, you can make it smaller or cheaper or lighter or spinning more slowly or some combination thereof. And so you might be in a centrifuge that's spinning fast enough to get you a third of a gravity at the outer edge, not one gravity, and that's a much lighter, cheaper vehicle to build than one that has to simulate one gravity.
Also, a follow-up question in terms of the testing gravity. We have a variety of physiological issues. Are all of those attributed to the lack of gravity? Do you have reason to believe that?
The ones that we're seeing on station are all attributed to lack of gravity. The blood pressure, the glaucoma, the bone mass deterioration, the muscle atrophy, all of that is lack of gravity. Once we're outside the Van Allen belts, we'll get a whole brand new set of physiological problems based on radiation density, and we have no experience with that at all. Well, other than the 6 or 7 Apollo missions, and that's just are going to require shielding. You put mass between the human body and the universe, but again, there's engineering work to be done there, but we think we know how to solve that. And we know what radiation doses are healthy because, for good or for bad, we have experience with humans receiving various radiation doses, including fatal ones. We just don't have the data on gravity. That's why we need the free-flying centrifuge.
But if they're testing it now to a small extent.
Testing what now?
Twin study.
Oh, the twins. Yeah. Well, but again, that's testing zero gravity, not 1/6 or 1/3, and that's where we need the data. Is 1/6 and 1/3 gravity. And then Rain, if you could, she's been really patient with the mic. If you can bring it up to her after. So.
Well, I always start at the front of the room and then go back. I tell them that, and then I work my way back
All right.
again.
We'll try to get to you.
In your example on traveling to Mars, you have where the planets are aligned, and then you sort of play catch up. What is, besides, I guess, like maybe splatting is the main problem, but why don't you wait and let Mars catch up to you?
There's lots of scenarios for orbital dynamics, and what they come down to is amount of energy that you need, and that translates into propellant and fuel. So you can do much shorter transfers, but they just cost a lot more. And so the mission profile showed there is actually a compromise between lower energy, meaning lower propellant and fuel and propellant cost, and lower trip time. You could do faster, you could do longer.
Well, like if you got that nuclear rocket.
If you have a Vasimir, you can go in 39 days. Yes, and that would be a good thing if you have one that works.
Okay.
Don't have one of those yet. Okay. Yeah.
Did you? What's your comments on like human hibernation that was done on the talk previous to this? That according to their estimates, would reduce the amount of consumables needed to about 1/3 current projections.
I know what John's working on. It would certainly help. You're getting the exact same radiation dose while you're asleep as you are awake, so you're still going to need the same amount of shielding. And I'm not going to be the first. So I'm perfectly happy taking engineering risks, biological risks scare the willies out of me. So yeah.
Hi, so I have a more physiology question.
Okay.
As far as like glaucoma and weakness of eyesight and everything like that, how to actually work this? So obviously it's going to cause the ocular muscles to fail a little bit, and that's going to cause the lack of ability to read and things. Can you maybe go a little further into that? Just explaining it in 5.
Since I know we're over time, come see me after. I'll be happy to talk about it, but I know we're over time. I don't know if there's more questions or not, and I do want to spend 30 seconds on the Martian.
She has been waiting. We can do her question.
Okay, let's get her. You'll be the last question. I will point out on screen is the location if you want to download these slides for some obscure reason. I'm violating copyrights left, right, and center. Please forgive me. And then I'll do the Martian last. Go ahead.
How come we're not hearing more about the privately funded robots that will, nuclear power plant, robot electric bulldozer on the moon to do all that stuff, where we're still working on all these huge boatload of problems?
Well, there are active efforts right now to do privately funded lunar rovers, but they're about yay big. Okay, they're very, very small. And the answer to that is money. This stuff costs money, and we're working really hard on making it cheaper. So. I do want to mention, because I have a prize to hand out. For those of you who live in or near Atlanta, Andy Weir is going to be appearing by Skype at Maker Faire on October 4th. I get to interview him over Skype. It's by Skype because he doesn't fly. I just think it's hysterically funny. That's going to be at noon in Decatur. It is free, but you need a ticket. So just Google it and you can find out where to go. But the movie will actually come out 2 days before that, so the timing's going to be perfect. I have not been looking this forward to a movie in 20 years. I really hope they haven't screwed it up. Every indication is they haven't screwed it up. And thanks to Tanya Hyman, is she here? Thanks to Tanya, way in back. We have a poster, which I have not even couldn't tell where it was. It's over that way. The hell with Georgia. Okay, come get your poster. All right.
Okay, thank you to Stephen.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.